Mark Rogers TV talking college football, and of course, let's go to the SEC, playing some big boy football in Death Valley with LSU hosting Alabama. And the Tigers off to a rough start, but they look to be a much improved football team and a worthy opponent for possibly the best team in college football as we bring in Ben George of Tide 99-1 to talk about the Tigers and the Tide. Hey, Ben, how are you?
Good, Mark. How's it going?
It's going just fine. I think this is one of the more anticipated matchups in college football and has been for the last 5 or 6 years. So LSU, of course, had the one clunker against Auburn. They lost to Mississippi State. No shame in that at this point. Looked like a much worse loss at the time. But this is a different football team right now. So your thoughts about LSU and how good this team is?
If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Mark, I would have said they were probably a 4 or 5 loss team, worst case. They're definitely not to the level they have been. They definitely still have playmakers, but they're not. They don't have as much skill as they've had in the past. But they're starting to find an identity. That identity is running the football, and they've done a good job of that in recent weeks, and they've won some good games. But I still think they're not quite as good as they've been in the past. But they're a team in that atmosphere, in that environment, in this stage, can absolutely win a big ball game.
Okay, Ben, before we dive in on the matchup, let's check the health of the Crimson Tide. So what you got for us?
Yeah, Nick Saban's had a couple updates today and yesterday. Good news for Alabama fans is T.J. Yeldon will play for sure. He sat out at the end of that Tennessee game. And then Cam Robinson, the left tackle, the freshman from Louisiana, who's been playing tremendous all season. He suffered an injury a couple weeks ago. Saban said today that he would be back. He's been cleared to play. So that's a big boost to the offensive line for Alabama. They're going to need it to protect Blake Sims and to open up that running game.
So we got a physical football game. There's no question that's the type of game we get. It deviated from that just slightly last year with the wide receivers at LSU and Zach Mettenberger throwing the ball downfield a little bit more. But basically this is run downhill. This is give it to the tailback 25 or 30 times. Leonard Fournette is a freshman who's burst onto the scene. We expected this as the #1 recruited running back in the nation. Bama with a great rush D. LSU finding its running game behind a tremendous offensive line. We'll see these guys playing in the NFL. They ripped up Ole Miss for 264 on the ground. So who wins this war in the trenches?
Well, I think Alabama ultimately does. I think mainly because that's their strength. That's their strength is stopping the run. And I think that they know that's coming, and that gives them an advantage. LSU is still a very good team running the ball, but they're still young, and it's going to be a huge stage against Fournette. He had a great week against Ole Miss last week, 113 yards. He had a big week against Florida, so he's performed in the big stage, but he's still trying to settle into that role, and I think Alabama's going to key on it pretty well. I like the defensive line has done a pretty good job, and there were some concerns with the way they finished their game against Tennessee, but a week off, week to prepare, a week to kind of get everything together. I like where they are right now, and I like their offense has been playing well, Alabama's, and I think they can run the ball. It's tough not having Drake there. They don't have as much depth as they had to begin the season. But with Yeldon back, I expect Henry. Henry hasn't had, the greatest last few weeks, but I think he can have a really big game potentially in this one. So, I think Alabama ultimately wins the battle in the trenches. I think they're just a little bit better there, and I think they have an advantage because LSU's going to have to try to stop the pass. They can't focus on the rush as much, where Alabama can really just key on the run game all night.
So with LSU, we talked about the running game, but you would think that they're going to have to throw and hit on some pass plays. If you look at their passing stats against the better teams on their schedule, Wisconsin, Auburn especially, even the Ole Miss win, the passing stats are just basically non-existent. So just some really ugly efforts, some 8 for 22 kind of games, those type of passing efforts. And they're hitting on a couple plays downfield to give them some kind of chunk yardage. But they're going to have to do something, you would think. But I thought the same thing against Ole Miss. They ended up just running the ball between the tackles and not throwing for hardly anything. do think it's a different Ole Miss defense. It's probably just as good as Bama overall, but a bit faster, less bulk, less ability to stop the ground game between the tackles. So any fear at all of Bama giving up some big plays?
I don't know, Mark. I mean, we talked about. I mean, I think back to the A&M game, right? When we were having this conversation, and I said Alabama can't stop A&M through the air. I think they're going to have big chunks of yardage. So if I flip that and say, I don't think there's any chance of Jennings getting any yards to the air, and I don't think there is, but we've seen guys probably more talented than Jennings, likely, and more experienced. We've seen guys have career games against Alabama and rise to that occasion, especially at home. So it wouldn't surprise me if he said, what would you say, 225 yards would be a good game for Jennings, right? So say, I'm not talking 350, but say he had 225. That would be a good game. When you look at his numbers, he's completed in the game this season. He's completed over 9 passes in a game 3 times. Now he's kind of gone back and forth in that quarterback starting role, but 3 times he's completed more than 9 passes, and his career high, or the season high, is 13 completions against Mississippi State. So he's not going to throw the ball a lot. You got to avoid the big play. Alabama has to avoid that big play because that's what will kill them. But it plays into their advantage because Alabama's going to force him to pass. There's going to be a time that they're going to have to pass the ball, especially if Alabama can hop up early. Best case scenario, they get on the board early, put them in a position to have to push it a little bit on offense for LSU. There are 3 losses, Mark, or there are 2 losses for LSU. Both of those games, they passed for more yards than rush yards. Only once this year, outside of those 2 losses, had they done that. That was Wisconsin, a game which they barely won. So if they're rushing the ball more than they're passing it, they're a pretty good team. But if you force them to change that, have to pass the ball more, they're going to lose the ball game. And I think that's what Alabama's got to do. I don't expect a big game for Jennings, but my predictions have been a little off at times this year. He could have a decent game, but I think Alabama's in pretty good position with him behind center.
Having an off year on the prognostications this year.
Happens.
It does happen. I am as well. Just to give you a prelude to Mark Rogers TV's college football predictions later tonight. Yes, rough go on my confidence picks against the spread this year. But I think the formula for LSU in the passing game isn't like a 15 for 25 throwing the ball underneath. It's even if it's 8 for 22, it's like 4 huge plays in the passing game that produce some points or get them in field goal range or flip the field or something like that, and they win a 17-13 game or 14-10 type game. All right, speaking of which, you mentioned one of the tougher places to play in college football, Death Valley. They got Ole Miss a few weeks ago. The Tide comes in. It was a really tough game a couple years ago en route to the national championship. They needed the McCarron to Yeldon play on the swing pass to get it done late there. Everybody's better at home than they are on the road. But do you think Bama's significantly better at home, and do you have any concerns about their play on the road?
Well, I would before this year. It doesn't really concern me as much. I think they've been equally as good. And they, quite frankly, they've lost some of their bigger games at home, LSU, A&M, a few years back. But this year's been a little different because the quarterback situation's been – Blake Sims has been great. But he's still been a little shaky in those tougher positions. The Ole Miss game, he did not play well. But I think the last time out against Tennessee, has to make you feel better. The first 20 minutes of that game, outstanding. Now, the last 40 minutes of that, left something to be desired, I think, on both sides of the ball. But I think that game, having that game under his belt, because, look, as bad as Tennessee's been this year, it's still a tough place to play. And they get up for that game. It was a loud game. I was there. It was a loud atmosphere. That Third Down for What song, one of your favorites, I know, that was playing. It seemed almost, every 3 or 4 plays. So there was a tough spot to be in. Blake Sims, he answered the bell. And I think that's going to carry into this one. But this is a totally different atmosphere for him. He's been there a couple times on the sideline, so he knows what it's like. He's not going to be caught off guard by that. But it's tough being in that huddle with those guys going after you. And this is a big game for LSU, and they're going to be going after him. They know they can ruin Alabama's season with this one, and they still want to do that with Nick Saban on the sideline. I feel better now than I did a couple weeks ago, Mark, to answer your question. But I still think you want to see them get out of that first quarter without giving up any big plays or making any big mistakes.
I'm pretty secure in assuming that you're good with the college football rankings right now because you know Alabama's Alabama. The SEC West is going to work itself out, and you got to take care of the business on the field, which is extremely difficult with three excellent football teams in front of you. But if Alabama does win, um, unlike Ohio State, Michigan State, go on down the line, TCU, Baylor, where they're looking around the country to see what's going on, the winner of that SEC West is golden. They're good. But that aside, are there Alabama fans out there? Have you heard from Alabama fans who are a bit miffed by the number 5 ranking right now?
I don't think so. I think most people understand that Bama's in as good a shape as anybody. You take care of business and you're in. If you lose again, you're out. I mean, it's that simple. You know, these rankings are going to change a lot, Mark. So, you know, you can't read into it a whole lot. You know, do they think that there may be a better one-loss team than Oregon and maybe Auburn? Sure. I mean, I think there's some of that. But I think you're in the position you want to be in at this point. And I think, frankly, you have to kind of like the position. To think that there's some people still ruling you out, or, you know, to think that Alabama's got a little something to, I think that's good for them. Instead of being in that 1 or 2 spot and just trying to hang on, got to go out there and prove it. It might get them up for a couple more games than maybe they wouldn't have. Although the rest of the schedule is pretty tough, minus homecoming. But I think it's a good spot for them to be in. I think most people are fine with it.
Hey, Ben, rough year on the predictions, but, you know, these are the money games. LSU.
Right.
State, Auburn. So if you step up here, we're going to dismiss what's happened before because these really count. So what you got for us on a score here? If I remember right, now it's coming back to me. Last year you were like on that LSU score.
Yeah, I nailed it.
Game, right?
I didn't want to bring that up, Mark, you know, because I was so off on A&M. But I will remind people that I have made 1 or 2 good predictions in my lifetime. LSU was one a year ago. I think officially I'm going with 27-21 Alabama. I think Alabama's going to win this game. I think it'll be tight. I think frankly it's going to be a really tough game for them. It's going to be smash mouth, but I think they'll pull it out. I think they have a better team. I think that's the bottom line. They have a better team, and they'll find a way to win this game, but I think it'll be close.
I've got to guess that's the over in Vegas. 27-21, that seems a little high on points.
I haven't looked, surprisingly. I mean, you probably are shocked by this, but I don't know the total for that game. But I would imagine that it's probably right around that number. Because, with Alabama scoring the way they have, even though LSU hasn't scored a ton of points, I think they have potential to score a little bit against a team like Alabama that has given up some bigger plays. But that's probably pretty close. I'd say it's probably around 51-52, if I had to guess.
All right, Ben. LSU, Alabama on Saturday. I know you'll be locked in. At one point, whether it's before the final rankings or after the final rankings, I think we could table these college football rankings and really tear into them one of these weeks.
Yeah, I hope so. And I just looked it up, Mark. 45 is the total, so you were right. It would be on the over side of that. So take the over. Lock of the year. Take the over.
Lock of the year. All right. I'm thinking this is like a 20-13 game.
How about 6-3? Would you take that?
3. I know you wouldn't take 9-6. Wasn't that the game a couple years ago?
Yeah, that was the game.
All right, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Mark, enjoyed it. We'll talk next week. Hopefully, we'll be previewing a pretty huge matchup against Mississippi State.